Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Corinne, who's the Director of Operations of Salt and Light. And Salt and Light empowers survivors of human trafficking to drive through health and wellness, workplace readiness, and ongoing support. So, Corinne, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me today.
So, what's your story?
Yeah. Well, I am, as you just mentioned, the director of operations for a nonprofit that provides trauma-informed workforce development, particularly for survivors of human trafficking in Chicago. And what I think is kind of cool is that myself and two of our other core employees are survivors of human trafficking in Chicago. So we're well positioned to kind of do this stuff. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So I'm the daughter of two Chicago police officers. My dad was a sergeant. First 10 years of my life were great. And then he pretty suddenly died of cancer. Um, and then my mom, who was also a police officer at the time, started drinking a little bit and got hurt really, really badly on the job and just became disabled, couldn't work anymore. And she had a lot of struggles, over the next 10 years, which kind of left me and my 11-year-old self unsupervised, for lack of a better word. And while we all like to think we would make great decisions at 11 without parental guidance, I didn't, and ended up finding myself with this hyper independence coupled with a lot of vulnerability. And so I ended up getting into the car with the wrong person, and I won't go into all the gory details about the trafficking situation, but it was 30 days and it just completely changed the trajectory of my life. Went from going to private school and, getting a good education, great family. We lived on the south side of Chicago, still do, but we had neighbors and I had this community, and all of that disappeared when my dad died. And so um I ended up going kind of to the opposite extreme of stability. And when I was able to escape that situation, I didn't have those support systems in place on this. I know I'm bouncing around, but that's a big part of why I do what I do today, because I understand the importance of those support systems. So yeah, I quit school. I ended up having a daughter at 16, abusive relationships, domestic violence, every one of those super traumatic events just about I think I went through, and we've all been through something, right? Everyone's been through something traumatic, I think, but when you don't have family or a network or a community to kind of help you make decisions and process and things, the consequences of that trauma can be a lot different. And for me, they were, and they cascaded and they snowballed until it got to a point where I was not functional anymore. And I lived that way for years. And then fast forward to 36, I was in another abusive relationship and I found out I was pregnant. And I just took everything I had and I put it into a duffel bag. Everything I had fit in a duffel bag. And I was living in an abandoned apartment just outside of Inglewood. And I have a prosthetic leg. Got hit by a car, lost my whole left leg. It was broken at the time. Like, things could not have possibly gotten any worse. But a baby was coming into the world now. And so it wasn't about me anymore and wallowing in despair. It was about, now I got to at least give this kid a good start in life and just do the best that I can. So I walked to the bus stop, didn't have bus fare. And I remember this part like yesterday. There was a bus driver who I had tried to get to let me on for free many times, and she never would. But for some reason, she saw something in my eyes. I would love to go back and find her at some point, but she kind of waved me on that particular time. And um that was the start. I remember sitting on the bus and thinking about how just that small decision that she made to offer support in the way that she could, to use what she had available in that moment to help another woman, made all the difference for me. Because if I had to walk all the way to the other side of the city, I probably never would have made it. Probably would have turned around. I mean, who knows what would have happened, but So I get on the bus, I go to the shelter. I'm pregnant now, so, they were willing to help me, at least just put a roof over my head. And I had my son, and, I remember I had a ninth grade education, no real job history. I had been arrested over the years and, goes with the lifestyle. And I could not find a job, Mate. I was just sure that, I mean, this was my plan. I would go get the shelter, find a job, get an apartment, live happily ever after. Couldn't find a job. I finally found a job at Starbucks, but it didn't pay enough to get an apartment. There was no way. I sat and did the math, and it would have taken me like 3 years to save up, everything I needed to get an apartment. And so my son was 4 months old at this point, and everyone's telling me, "Oh, you have a prosthetic leg, just get on disability. They'll give you an apartment, whatever." And I remember thinking, I don't want that for my son. I want something better for him. And then in walks this lady, Isabel, to the shelter. You know her, she walks in with full of confidence and talks really fast. But she said exactly what I needed. She said, "You need a job?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Well, I designed this program that will help you learn what you need to know. And then I've put together this group of people," at the time it was almost all women, "who are willing to use the people we know and the things we know and the degrees we have and the companies we run to help get you an opportunity." And that was all she promised, was an opportunity, right? And that was really all I needed. But I'm like, "Yeah, sign me up. When do we start?" And we started about a month later. And for the next year, I showed up every day and I took notes. I remember we would get stipends to kind of remove barriers, right? So the first month, everyone showed up in sweatpants and Crocs, generic Crocs. And then, little by little, we get those biweekly stipends. We start going to the thrift store together and we dressed a little bit better. We were able to get those bus cards for transportation and all that cool stuff. Stop me if I'm rambling, Mate.
No, not at all. Like, tell me more about the program itself. What were you guys doing there in their first, like, what was that first day like, or the first week like?
So I was in the second cohort, so it was the very beginning. Isabel wrote, she's got a PhD from Northwestern in the learning sciences and stuff. So she wrote this whole curriculum. But the first day was just about setting the rules and the expectations, right? Setting the tone. And I remember I had not lived a life of stability, Mate. Like, I was just all over the place. And she said, "Well, you have to show up on time every day. And you have to, you can't bring in sugary drinks. And you can't, these different little things. A lot of people smoked. You can't smoke. From the time you get here to the time you leave, there's no cigarette breaks, none of that stuff. And so I remember thinking, wow, this is a lot of rules for a job training program. I'd been through a few before, like they usually don't care. But then at the end, she's like, "You need to set goals. 5 goals this week. You need to figure out what they are." And we all looked at each other and we're like, "I want a job." Like that's it. Job, apartment, the dream for someone from where we're from. She's like, "No, they need to be specific." And then she explained what a SMART goal was. And that really, it's funny too, because one of my goals was to get a bachelor's. And so you do 1-year goals, 5-year goals, 10-year goals, right? So my 1-year goals were enroll in school, get an apartment, small things. Hit all those. But my 5-year goals, I had this notebook in which I wrote everything from Salt and Light. So I put buy a house, get a bachelor's, get my son into a good school. And what was the last one? I don't remember what the last one was, but 5 years later, after I graduated, I still was using that same piece of paper. And I'm going to cry when I say this. I bought a house, I got a bachelor's, and my son goes to one of the best schools in the city. And so
That's amazing.
it was really cool. And
Did you believe that was going to happen when you're writing these down?
I didn't. She just told us to write them down. So, I mean, there were things that I wanted to do. But again, in the very beginning of the program, a big part of a big challenge that we face is we don't believe that we can be any more than society tells us we can. And I mentioned that so many people who were assigned this incredible task of helping an amputee with a criminal record and no job history and other than waitressing and no education find a job that pays enough to support herself. you know, I was told to get on disability. I was actually told I was lucky because I qualified for disability. And then, the fact that I wasn't signing up for it, you know how many people would love to qualify for disability? And, so that's what I was told. That's the way I was told to think. And when you hear that enough, like anything else, you start to believe it. And so part of the obstacle that Isabel faced with women coming into the program, that's still true to this day, is that we just don't believe that we can ever have this life. The life, our best case scenario is pales in comparison to anybody we see walking down the street. It's almost like you exist in this different world than them. Like they're in one category and you're in another. And everyone that passes by you knows it. And I mean, it's just getting out of that way of thinking is one of the biggest hurdles.
So how did you start believing that you can achieve these goals?
Repetition was a big part of it. Like I needed someone to tell me, as often as they told me that I couldn't, I needed them to tell me that I could. And Isabel has this ability to just motivate you to be the best version of yourself by, I don't know what the right word is, but she's a visionary. So she thinks in these big ways, but she kind of makes you feel like you're crazy to not believe it. You're like, well, what do you mean? Why can't you buy a house? I'm like, I live in a shelter. Like that's the opposite end of the spectrum. And she's like, well, you could do it. And eventually, just through these small conversations and these positive affirmations and these little activities and big activities and volunteers who come in who are from that other side of the spectrum that I mentioned, who also believe that you can do it and who are willing to teach you how, eventually it just sticks.
And now I want to go back a little bit to your childhood. So you're raised by two police officers. What was I guess, but before your dad died, what was your life like? Like, did you have a good childhood, or was it, yeah, like, what was how was your childhood?
I mean, I did. I had one of those childhoods where, all summer long, you wake up in the morning, you hurry up, do your chores, eat breakfast, and you go outside and, you don't come back till the street lights go on kind of thing. You drink water from the water hose. And, I loved my childhood. From some of today's parents might not agree, but about drinking water from the water hose, but I thought it was great. My dad drank a little bit, but he had a really tough job. He worked on Harrison and Kedzie, which is a pretty rough area. And, he did it for a long time and he worked with the kids for a long time and like the youth. So anyway, he saw a lot of really rough stuff. And so one thing I remember candidly are dinner table conversations when they were on different shifts. They would usually be on different shifts, but when we were able to eat dinner together, they would talk shop. And, they would catch themselves when they would get too graphic. But
Do you,
some
do
of the
you
things that
remember? Do you remember some of those stories, like some of the things that they were
man,
dealing with? Yeah.
yeah, I do. I remember my dad. He's passed away now. I hope he doesn't get in trouble for this. He can't get in trouble for it, but I hope nobody gets in trouble. But I remember he had this box in his closet full of these weapons that he confiscated from people. And yeah, I would hear him when his friends would come over. They would kind of go through it because they were all types of different things. And I would overhear the conversations about how he got these and how he took them away. And I don't know, you want me to get graphic? I mean, they're pretty gory stuff,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Let's.
so there were bullwhips, like the long bullwhips that he caught one guy chained to an alley post and was being whipped with that. And then there were a lot of knives, some of them still had the little crusty blood on them. There were those Chinese stars that you throw. And I remember one of them was bent. One of the tips was bent. And my dad told the story to one of his friends about how the guy had thrown it and it like hit the side of someone's face and went into the garage. And yeah, I grew up listening to that kind of stuff. And then there were sad stories, right? There were the really sad ones about them finding an apartment full of kids with no parents home. And, the kids were wearing these diapers that they'd had on for days. And, they weren't conversations I was meant to hear, but you pair alcohol with those vivid memories. And
It must have been tough. To, wow. Yeah, it's really interesting to see this side of policing, right? It's not what most people, to your point about the people like walking down the street, you look at cops and assume they whatever, like, put bad people in jail, give you traffic tickets, but they're also dealing with a lot of these kind of, like, social work issues, dealing with kids, dealing with all sorts of problems that in some ways can get to you more than, some bad guy with a gun. I mean, this is the stuff that's, much more sad.
Yeah, and I think you're right. People do see them as almost these, I don't know, robots for lack of a better word, right? Like they're this idea, um, of law enforcement, and they think about all of their bad interactions with other cops in the past, and my dad was genuinely a good guy. He was really a great guy, but the weight that he carried, like, it compounds, right? You see this one horrible thing, and you don't just forget it and leave it there. You carry it with you. Fires, I remember. So my dad was in a fire when he was a kid while him and his brother were playing with a barbecue grill. He had burns all over his body. And so a couple of times he was at the scene of a fire. And once he had to run in and help someone get out. And so that, I mean, remember that. That was pretty traumatic for a while. And then there was another one where someone was taking bricks. They were stealing bricks off the side of a building where they were kind of crumbling for whatever reason. And then the building started falling, and he went inside to get some people out, and he was able to save someone's life, and he got a big award for it. But then I remember him being happy for a while after that because that was a positive outcome. But they're just people, you know?
That's yeah, it's an interesting point too, right? Because some of these outcomes don't end up going well, and probably more often than not, things don't go well in that line of work. And yeah, the happy endings are few and far between relative to everything else. And what about your mom's side of it? Was she seeing similar things? What was her job like?
Yeah, she worked on in two different stations, Racine and Monroe and 35th and Low. And I'm 45. So this was, I think, 91 was when she was done, when her injury happened. And so back then, women were a little bit different in the police force. They were still, active participants and all that kind of stuff. But they would pair, at least in my mom's case, they would pair her. She's 5 feet tall, 100 pounds looking wet. And they paired her with some big guy. And so I think that she had an element of feeling safe a little bit more than my dad did because in that same scenario, my dad was the big guy who was tasked with kind of protecting all the people who reported to him as a sergeant.
Interesting. Do you have any siblings?
I do. One younger sister.
Nice. How are you guys similar? How are you guys different?
Yeah. Well, she was 7 when I was 10 when my dad died. So she was more sheltered. She went to stay with my aunt for a lot of the time right after my dad died. And while my mom was in and out of, I think she's had 18 major surgeries. Like they severed discs in her spine and herniated, and like she was in the hospital a lot. So my sister actually has a PhD. Her husband owns a big HVAC company. Like she struggled for a while there. She definitely did, but she was able to kind of pull it together. I was the kid who no one really wanted around because I got that hyper independence during those first couple years after he died. I don't know if they didn't want me around or if it was that I didn't know how to accept help anymore, but and I still struggle with that to this day. Very independent. But yeah, my sister was able to graduate and she went to community college for a while, and she decided she was just getting away from Chicago altogether, and she went down to Normal, Illinois, went to school down there, got her bachelor's, and then she came back to Chicago and got a job in higher ed, and so was able to just kind of keep getting degrees through her work, through her job, and now she's awesome.
Interesting. And it sounds like, yeah, like during the same like time period, your life was moving in the opposite direction of hers. Was that like hard for you to like were you still in touch with your sister? Like what was that? Was there a relationship like with her during that period of your life?
No, when I was about 21, 22, I just left. I mean, no one knew where I went. My mom had gotten custody of my daughter, and I had her 2 weeks before I turned 16, and my mom went and got sober and, got her whole life together while I was pregnant. So anyway, when I was 21, I just disappeared. kind of into the abyss because I found that it was easier to live a certain lifestyle. I don't want to say easier, but the danger elements, how can I frame this? Hang on, give me a minute. Let me think. I felt more comfortable in the chaos, I think is the best way to say it. And so when things started to calm down and, my mom got good and my sister graduated and was coming home and all that stuff, I just didn't know how to exist in that. I was used to the chaos. And so I went and I sought it out and I found it on the street around chaos. And I stayed there for a long time till I got pregnant.
And I think one of the interesting things that I learned through just Salt and Light is just how much human trafficking exists right here in the US. It's like you used to like whatever seeing in the movies, and it's always some like foreigners or someone stealing people to go elsewhere, but it's happening right here. So I don't know, I'd be curious if you can talk a little bit more about that and maybe like the magnitude of the problem and maybe like why more people don't know about it, even though it's happening right under our noses.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. UIC did, or University of Chicago did a study. They found that 25,000 women a year are being trafficked in Chicago, right? And most people picture human trafficking, there's a boxcar or rail car element and, handcuffs and all that kind of stuff. Human trafficking is being sexually exploited through force, fraud, or coercion. There's more to that definition. I should probably look it up. But it also looks like a 15-year-old with a really crappy, manipulative boyfriend who says, hey, let's run away from home and we'll have to get our own apartment and buy a car. And, if you have sex with these 20 guys who are all willing to pay $100 each, we'll be able to do that. And if you love me, you'll do it. And so she does that. And then they get the car and they get the apartment. And then it's, well, now, you're going to have to keep paying the rent until I find a job. So, here's how much we need. That's the quota, right? Here's how much we need to survive and live comfortably. So that's what you're going to have to bring in. And the woman, thinking that he loves her, says, okay. And he says, well, I'll help actually, I'll go out and find these guys for you. So you don't have to walk down the street or anything. And she'll say, oh, so you're contributing too by doing that hard work. And then he goes and says, you know what? You shouldn't have to do this work by yourself. I'm going to go find a couple other girls who can chip in and we'll get a bigger apartment and we'll just give them a room. And so me and you can, and then you'll barely ever have to do it anymore. And she says, well, that sounds okay, as long as, we're not hurting anybody. And so he comes back and he says, let's add another girl and another girl, another girl, let's rent a house. And so it just kind of cascades like that. Next thing you know, drugs are being inserted because that's how you control someone. It's almost impossible to do this without the drugs. And those are introduced as a way to kind of cope with the trauma and the stress and the horrible feeling of being forced to do these things. And then it just becomes, a way of numbing yourself. So that's one way that trafficking looks. And then there's what we call the gorilla, right? That's the one who does. One of our employees here went through that and just got her trafficker sentenced to not just a couple years ago, like 40 years in federal prison or something, but where they do take you and tie you up and lock you in a basement. And they do what's called breaking you. So you're completely isolated for as long as it takes until you're broken, almost like a horse that's caught from the wild. And eventually you give up and you stop fighting. And then when people ask that question, like, well, why didn't you just run? Well, why didn't you just this or that? And it's like, she was broken. She didn't, And then there's the mental manipulation part of it, which I think is probably the strongest element. Stronger than the love, stronger than the fear. It's where you believe that your life would be infinitely worse if you didn't comply, right? So a woman gets arrested and caught in a sting. Why does she keep her mouth shut? Why didn't she tell the police? Well, because if she does, there's no proof, right? There's no way to prove this, that you weren't willing to do this. And then he finds out about it, you're going to end up, in the river. You're going to end up, or worse, like in my case, your family is going to end up in the river. And so after a while of that, you become numb to it. And you just think, well, I've got a ninth grade education. I've got nothing. Like, what's my other option if I If I try to find a job, nobody's going to hire me. And yeah, so the psychological manipulation is huge. But I'm sorry, I'm rambling
No,
again
no, no,
today.
no. This is not. No, this is that's very interesting. Like how when you said like these guys were like they would threaten your kids. Is that what's
Yeah, no, they didn't threaten my kids, they threatened my sister, and that's, like, constant, so they'll find out where you go to school, they'll find out, who you hang out with and where you live through innocent conversations, through oh my god, I can't think of the word. It'll come to me, but they'll find out all these things about you, and then they'll use it later to threaten you, like, I'll just go grab your sister if you leave, you know?
wow?
Yeah.
How like that's a especially I guess yeah you're a teenager, like very young teenager, right? When this thing started, like, did this start for you when you were 11, or at what point did this?
No, 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 no. It all happened within 30 days. That was it. It was just 30 days of chaos. I got into a car with the wrong person, someone I had seen, in the neighborhood where I lived, thought was harmless, and it ended up being an awful situation. And very fortunately for me, it ended 30 days later because he got arrested for something unrelated. But there were people there who had been there for years. Yeah.
And it's yeah, so it's initially this like love, right? You're just in love with somebody. Do you think like from the guy's perspective, like was this their plan all along, or do you think like it's like I'm kind of curious about like what like what turns somebody evil if there really is evil, like what's like they're trying to understand like their like the thought process of how these things end up happening, and it's yeah like it sounds like it was like a lot of like each thing was like, okay, I can see if I just do this other thing where like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, if only I get through this thing it's going to get better and then we can get out of it. And then you compound that over a period of time and it's like holy shit, like all these atrocities have happened. When at any one step of it, you're like, you can sort of see how that next decision came about. So yeah, I'm curious, like, to kind of get more into their minds and how this ends up happening.
Well, I mean, there's different situations, right? So one of the women that we work with, her trafficker pretty much had a playbook that had been shared for generations. And I mean, it evolved over time. The drawings turned into videos and things like that, but it was a how-to manual almost. And I'd love to maybe have her on your show one of these days. She can talk more about that. But there's best practices almost, right? And so it's very popular in the gangs. In some neighborhoods, you'll call it pimps and hoes, and like other situations. But what's going on in the man's mind? So they have to know that they're crossing a boundary. I can't speak for everyone. I know in my situation, he was just an absolutely awful person and 100% knew what he was doing. How he got that way, I don't know. But what I think happens is that over time they become numb too, and they just don't realize that what they're doing is as awful as it is. The beatings, you have to know when you're hitting someone that it's awful, but then they justify it in their own minds like, well, she's not listening and she has to listen, or, she'll end up dead. I won't be able to protect her out there. I've heard that one before. For the scenario I explained with the two teenagers, maybe he really does think it, but I know I could never, ever ask someone I love to do that, right? I'd find another way. So is that evil? I guess it depends on your definition, but I think it is. But were his motives evil, or did he just have this distorted way of thinking where he allowed himself to justify and say that the ends justify the means, right?
And okay, how do you get out of this, right? So we heard your story of how you got out, but if someone's listening who's in a situation that they might not even realize is this situation, but when they hear it, it's like, holy shit, that's my life. Or when they're being threatened or they feel like there are all these consequences for telling someone or trying to leave. How, yeah, like what message do you have for them? Like how can someone actually get out of this? And because at the end of the day, it sounds like, I mean, I'm sure there are risks in some of these threats. Like they do end up acting out some of the threats, but the reality is like you can get out, right? And there is support out there. So I'm curious, yeah, what do you have to say to people in that position today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And fortunately, there's so much training now within the hospitality sector, truck drivers, even just tattoo shops because branding is a huge part of the trafficking. There's so much training that has taken place that when you walk up to someone today and say, I'm being trafficked, the response will be much different than 20 years ago because people just didn't believe it was happening at all back then. But now at least the people who are in these public facing jobs do know. So what I would say is look for an opportunity and ask for help. And do that knowing that if you go into a Hyatt, for example, I just got back from Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, and the Hyatt, the Marriott, like all the big ones, they're all being trained on this for everyone from the front desk to the janitor, right? And so obviously keep yourself safe, but tell someone, ask for help, use your common sense to determine when it's a safe time to do that. But 99% of the time, you have to go to a hotel to do the out calls to meet the men that they're hooking you up with. And so that is this, in my opinion, one of the safest places to do it.
Interesting. And you just said go up to the front desk and talk to them. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. They've been trained to be able to, yeah, to have these conversations.
Yeah. I can send you some stuff on it, but there's a city of Chicago trafficking task force, Cook County, state of Illinois, federal government, like all of these task forces that have emerged that revolve around human trafficking. And what they found is that, most people don't know or believe that it's happening. And so building awareness was a huge goal for these organizations. And I think that's a big part of the reason that we here at Salt and Light that serve survivors have seen such a dramatic increase in the number of participants who need our help is because people are actually starting to escape now, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, okay, tell me more about the Salt and Light program. You talked about your journey, but I know like you guys have been able to help a lot more women over the past years that you've been in existence. Like, what does that program look like now? If you can talk about some other success stories that have come out of the Salt and Light program, and yeah, it'd be cool to see what else you guys have done.
Yeah, I love bragging on program graduates. So, to answer your first question, we started back in 2016, 2017, 10 women in a church basement, donated space. 2024, we moved in, well, 2021, we moved into a little 1,000 square foot storefront. Uh, we were serving 40 women a year, stayed that way until January of January of last year, when we moved into, or I'm sorry, May of last year, we moved into a 6,000 square foot building. And the reason we made these, physical moves is because we had waiting lists that numbered in the hundreds, but we only had that many spaces because the physical limitations. And then again, the stipends and the bus cards and all the support that we throw at every woman. So we said we had to scale. And, this year we'll serve 160 women in 2025. And we still have women, tons of women on our waiting list. I think there were 86 for the last group. Every 3 months, we start another group of. And the program has evolved. Obviously, COVID, did a lot. We added a lot more digital literacy than we used to have, mainly because, everything happens digitally now. But there's still, so we do these psychometric tests in the beginning, at the end. There's anxiety, depression, self-esteem. And yeah, anxiety, depression, and self-esteem. We see these huge, huge increases. So the first 3 months of the program is kind of this revolves around that. We want people to believe that they can do it. It's almost like pre-work, right? And then there's nutrition classes and there's exercise classes every day, 4 days a week for 3 months. So it's all like getting you to a position where everybody's teachable, but you're ready to really, take the next step in your professional growth.
You know,
Yeah.
I really like that part of it. So we just had a Marine veteran on the podcast before this, and I do work with Special Forces veterans that are whatever. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there too in terms of like mental health and reintegration back into society. But one of the things that stands out is how to form bonds, like social bonds with people. And for them, like famously, there's like the Hell Week for the Navy SEALs, where they go through all this like insane like physical endurance. But the part of it's not even so much about the physical side of it; it's much more mental. And it's also when you come out in the other end, you form these like really close relationships with the people that were, and it sounds like, yeah, like you guys are doing something similar, right? Where it's like, yeah, the physical exercise, the nutrition, like, and to your point, it's hard, right? Like if you're a smoker, if like you like your Pepsi and you can't bring it into this program, you could go through some shit, right? But coming out the other end of it, like you're making these sacrifices with a group of people that, I'm curious, but it would seem like you have like all the right ingredients to form these like really close bonds with other people that have gone through that same experience with you.
Yeah, and we do, and I still talk to about 70% of the women who I went through the program with. And you're so part of the trauma informed piece is that it's the same group of women from the beginning to the end, both the program participants and a lot of the staff is usually the same, and the volunteers are a huge, huge component of that. So I had a mentor when I started the program, and I was just talking to her this weekend. I was out to her house in Colorado, and like she's one of my closest friends. I want to say that that was one of the first, if not the first healthy relationship that I had in over a decade because to your point, you forget how to build those. You don't trust people. You think that you're like this pariah and that you don't want to let anyone help you because, what they're going to ask for in return is going to be 10 times more than you have to give. And you want to avoid those situations of being into debt to someone. But once you finally get to a point mentally and emotionally where you realize that the world does have good people in it, that changes everything.
Yeah, that's such an interesting, like, because my bias and just given like my story is like my default is like I trust people, like people are good. But to your point, if you're coming from that world, like your default is like, no, people are not necessarily evil. I'm sure there are a lot of evil people there, but there are also people that are there that they want something else in return from you. And it's an interesting way to make that switch, right? To go from like, no, like you were saying, like from when you're 11 years old, like I'm on my own. I got to figure this shit out. And not only that, but everyone around me wants something from me and I need to protect myself.
Yeah.
To then start to trust people again and to be able to, yeah, to ask for help and then rely on people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What was that transition like for you?
I'm still going through it, Mate, to be honest, in some ways. It's so in Salt and Light, I went from one extreme to, a year into the process to where I saw that there were good people in the world and I was willing to accept that fact that they exist, right? We were chipping away at these concrete walls that I had around my heart and, that my hyper awareness and hyper independence and therapy and things like that helped me get farther along in that process. But it's still hard to have a relationship, and so that's what we kind of do sometimes too is learn to identify. So self-awareness is a huge, huge piece of the program. You have to identify those things in you and figure out how to navigate them and live a good, healthy, happy, productive life, knowing they exist. Everybody's got something, right? Some kind of quirk or something. For me, it's I'm afraid to depend on anyone because people let you down, right? And so I'm a leaps and bounds better than I used to be, but I'm still a single mom who owns my own house and my own car, and because I can't let anyone in completely. So anyway, it's about learning those things about yourself so that you can plan for them and figure it out.
Wow. Another thing that stood out to me when you're describing your experience was when you're just walking down the street and you feel like you're in a separate world from the other people around you. Say more about that. Like, what was it? What was going through your mind as you were going down, like seeing these people? Like, how? Yeah, what were you thinking about? What did you think their life was compared to yours? Like, what was that experience
Yeah.
like?
Well, I'll use an extreme example, right? When, let's say someone gets out of a stretch limo downtown right in front of a homeless person who's sitting on the sidewalk with a sign, genuinely starving, right? They're two opposite extremes of the spectrum. Let's just say hypothetically. That homeless person is going to feel some shame. And that a lot of times you think people see things in you that they don't really see. So nobody really knew that, I had been trafficked when I was 15 and nobody knew all of these different things that I was ashamed of. but I felt like they did. I just felt like I was being judged, and I felt like I had so much to be ashamed of, and I felt like everyone was looking down on me. Because in some cases they were, because everyone who knew about this was, and then you kind of factor in your clothes, and the way people are dressed, their level of self-care, their, driving versus, walking, and all these different elements. You just feel like you're different and you're not a part of that whole subculture.
Yeah, interesting.
And then a big thing that comes into play is you might notice like a lot of homeless people, and different people will say good morning, and they're like, they try harder than the average person to be nice. They'll hold the door open for you, and right away many people think that they're doing that because they want something, right? And so, are they going to ask me to, for $5 if they hold the door open for me or something like that? And that comes into play because I was homeless for a while. And so, because you know that during certain interactions, people are judging you because they want to avoid being asked for a dollar, right? You know how people normally act when you ask them for a dollar. They don't just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it." They look at you like you're garbage. And so, again, that repetitious behavior starts to become ingrained in your psyche, and you feel like everyone you interact with is judging you and just doesn't want to be bothered, even when there's no dollar involved.
Wow. And then during all this, like you're also a mom, right? You had your first child at 16, you were saying?
15.
Um, and then you had your second kid at 36, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very different points in your life versus like, yeah, where you are today. That experience been like as a mom? And I'm just curious. I have two young kids myself, and I always want to hear like what parenting advice others have and how to think about raising kids. And from everything you've been through, I think it'd be it's an interesting perspective on being a parent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm still figuring it out myself. He's 8 years old, and I don't know how I got so freaking lucky to have this kid who's just, everybody says their kids are amazing, and everyone's kids are amazing, right? But this kid, I I can't emphasize enough. He was born homeless, right? And now he's like, he's got that element. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm veering off again, but he's an
No,
amazing.
please, yeah. Tell me more. Yeah, what's he like?
So he has this humility because he remembers, we didn't go from homeless shelter to house. We went to an apartment on the South Shore on the East End where you couldn't use the living room because there were two apartment buildings that were identical, three flats, and the picture window on the second floor, which is where we were, kept getting shot out. And so, they get it replaced and then it got shot out again. So they were targeting someone in that apartment, but ours was identical right next door. So
Wait,
we never
hang
went in
on.
the
So
living
just
room.
like people were shooting at your apartment, mistaking it
No, no,
from a
no, no, the
different
neighbor's
the
apartment.
neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, it happened twice while we were living there. It was on Ninth and East End, so it's a really bad part of Chicago. But that was our first apartment, and we never went into the living room because that picture window got shot out twice next door while we were living there. And you hear on the news about, people sitting on their couch and getting shot, and that it really happens. No one got hurt in that instance, but that's the reality. So we just stayed toward the back of the house. But that was our first apartment.
That is nuts. I mean, that's like, yeah, like for people who have not experienced something like that, that is so
Yeah.
like if you can't feel safe in your own house or the thing that's interesting is first of all just how resilient humans are, and you adapt to that. You're like, oh, we just don't go in next to the window. We just hang out in the back of the house because the bullets won't hit us here. Like
Yeah.
it's wow. What a story. What a way. Okay,
I never thought about it that way.
right, but it's
But yeah,
yeah.
we were just, I was so happy to be out of that shelter, Matei, and actually have my own apartment. I mean, I didn't really, I mean, like you said, you just kind of adapt and you focus on what you have to be grateful for.
And so, okay, so that's how. So your son went from being homeless to living in that apartment. And how old was he when you guys were in that apartment?
He was, let's see, I just started working at Spins, so he was 2 years old. Yeah, he took his first steps down the hallway in the shelter. I'll never forget that because you used to have to go to the main room and kind of write your name on a piece of paper every night for their data and, so they can get funding. And it was a long hallway. And I remember he was holding on to the wall, and then all of a sudden he just walked off and just started stepping. And all the other women in line who were waiting to check in were like, "Ah," yeah, it was, but that's where we came from. That's how we started his life. And what I was saying before, so he goes to a really, really good school now, thanks to a scholarship, school that I could never afford in a million years. But he's smart and he's kind and he's really tall with a oddly deep voice for an 8-year-old, but it's like this nurturing element. And like I just know when he grows up, he's going to be awesome. I dread, but also look forward to the day when I sit him down when he's older and I kind of explain my backstory, which became his backstory. And I hope that he takes that and integrates it into the way that he sees himself in terms of his resilience and how much I love him. I'm going to cry again. The fact that, he's here for a reason because he'll be able to touch and relate to people who are going through struggles, that not everyone might be able to.
Wow. What like and so this is obviously a remarkable story, and it's due mostly to you, right? Like and what you've been able to accomplish, but also in part to organizations like Salt and Light. And but talk about the other piece of this puzzle, which is like the companies that end up hiring graduates from your program. And right, because that's the next step. Like you're talking about the first goal that all of you had in the beginning was just like, I need a job. Like, forget about all these other things that I can't even like, picture myself dreaming of. I just want a job. So tell me more about that component and how, if there are companies listening to this that would be interested in hiring some of these graduates, how to go about it and what impact that has on their lives.
I'm so glad you asked because one of the main things that I do at Salt and Light is I help find jobs for survivors. What the job process is like, right, in hiring a thriver, and for anyone who's listening, how they can get involved. So
Yes.
I'm gonna kind of tie that back to my personal journey first, and then I'll talk about that process. But when I was in Salt and Light, I worked really, really, really hard. And I somewhere along the line, I realized that I had superpowers that I didn't know existed. And one of those you mentioned was resilience, and the other one was grit. I'm gritty, right? Like the whole building can be, falling apart and I'll get it fixed and then I'll keep going on whatever I was focusing on. And, all these different things can happen and I'm able to stay focused and things don't bother me the way they bother other people, right? And because I've slept in abandoned buildings, like who cares if, my bed's not comfy and has a lump? It's, just different things. I didn't get a good night's sleep. I went days without sleep. Who cares, But I started to realize that that was a superpower that I had. And that is one of the main characteristics that we see in almost everyone who comes through here. And so Isabel saw that too. She actually had me make a video for the curriculum about grit. That's how gritty I am. And it's good and bad in some ways. But so she used that to convince the CEO of Spins to give me a job as pretty much a file clerk, right? I was an intern, not even a job, just to give me, hang on one second. Yes. No. She convinced them to just give me a chance. And that was all I needed. And we do longitudinal data going back 8 years, and I'll get more to that in a second. But so I started there as a paid intern. I showed up an hour early every day, didn't clock in till, 8 o'clock, and I stayed late every day to finish absolutely everything I could find to do, even though I clocked out on time. They didn't know that I was even doing that, but I worked so freaking hard. And then halfway through my internship, they're like, wow, and so they offered me a job, permanent. And I took it as I think I was an office assistant at that time. And now I'm in there. And so I start asking questions and, offering to take meeting minutes in these meetings that don't need minutes just so I can learn. And like, I just jumped on every opportunity and I got a raise. And then I was able to move out of the shelter. That was when I was able to move out of the shelter. My commute was 2 hours every day on the bus. I had to take my son on with a prosthetic leg, by the way. Middle of winter, I had to push my son in the stroller to the bus stop, take him to child daycare, and nobody knew this. I didn't tell anybody this. I had to take him to daycare, then take another bus all the way down 79 to the red line, then take the red line all the way to State and get on the brown line and then walk all the way from the merchandise mart, 2 hours each way to work.
2 hours each way.
Each way. Each
Holy
way.
shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
Each way. So
Yeah, and you're living in the shelter during all this.
I was living in a shelter. Yeah. for the first
Did
year.
other people at work know? I mean, I'm assuming like, some people knew, but, like, did the colleagues that you're interacting with, like, know anything like this is going on in your life?
No, they knew I took the bus and, they offered to walk with me but I didn't want anyone to know I lived. There were a couple who knew that I lived in a shelter, but all she could do was give me the opportunity to earn my way up to make enough to get an apartment and in a car. And I did all those things. And so my whole point in saying all this is that all that the women who are graduating from our program need is a chance. They just need an opportunity. We're not asking you to hire them as, like you would a recent college grad. We're just asking you to, give them a paid internship, 6 months, 3 months, even just a trial. And that's what I usually recommend to companies that are hiring. I'm like, you know, non-binding, just give them a chance, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Yeah, no one's no one's ever really disappointed. I mean, obviously, not everyone stays at the same job forever. They'll get their degree and then they'll, go look for a different job doing exactly what they wanted to do, but even that doesn't happen often. Like, we've got my friend India, who was in the cohort with me, who's been with CA Fortune for 6.5 years now. And there's a million other examples, and I won't give all the examples because I don't want to, not everybody wants the world to know that they're survivors. They just want to be normal people. But yeah, that grit, that resilience, that determination is huge. So to answer your second question, what do companies who might be interested in hiring need to do? Take a little bit of money in December when you're doing your budget for next year, 30 grand, 45 grand, something like that. Set it to the side for a paid internship. And then everybody's got stuff around the office that needs to be done, even if it's just wiping down whiteboards or, greeting, sitting at a receptionist desk. Even if you're a hybrid, you don't have that many people in the office, so what? This woman who's going to come there is going to have all the components of a great employee. You just have to teach her what she needs to know to succeed in your company, whether that's finance or data analytics or marketing or hospitality, or, we have partnerships with Hyatt and Marriott who have these huge programs designed just to hire survivors. And I know a big part of the reason they do that is because the hospitality sector is righting the wrong because these things happen. They don't know it's happening in their hotels, but they happen. But another element has to be the fact that we are some of the hardest working women you're going to find. And we're so grateful for an opportunity that a lot of other people wouldn't even consider. I remember thinking during COVID, there's all these jobs open that nobody wanted to take. But man, those jobs are a huge blessing for someone like I was. Any job with an opportunity for advancement that pays just enough to get by. That's all you need is just enough to have a modest apartment, and even taking the bus is fine just to survive. So that's what you do. You set aside a few dollars, or the next time your receptionist, leaves or gets promoted or whatever the case is, just consider hiring someone whose resume, is a little shorter than average, but who has a group of really smart, really knowledgeable people willing to back her and say, this is a good person. Rigorous program. Not everybody graduates, right? Not everybody, like a lot of people get through the first 3 months, then they find that they need a little bit more therapy. And then they go do that for a year or two, and then they can come back and do the second part. But if someone's graduating from our program, they have that stamp of approval from everyone who's involved. And that's a really big deal.
Yeah. That's it makes a ton of sense, and I think it's to that point about grit. You see the other end of the spectrum where you have whatever, like a recent college grad that's super entitled and they feel like they deserve all these things versus someone who actually like really wants the job and wants to prove something, not just to the company, but to themselves that they can do this. And that's the stuff that's like, you just you can't teach that. It's something that the other person has, or it's often a lot easier to teach the particular skills of that role than it is to find someone that has that hunger, the desire to be better than who they are, and has already demonstrated that they've taken steps to achieve that. That's really cool. That's really cool.
Another thing too is that the gratitude element that goes into it. Like, to this day, the guy who hired me, I mean, I'm so grateful, Mate, that he was just willing to take that chance, and so there's also that element that you wanna prove him right, because there's always gonna be people in the background saying, "No, what are you doing? Don't hire that. What are you talking? No, you can't do that liability," and blah, blah, blah. But be that person who says, "You know what? We're gonna do it. We're gonna give her a chance," and, the gratitude that that person feels toward the one who's willing to take that chance, you'll have a really good employee for a really long time.
Yeah. Wow, this is awesome. I guess a good so last question before we wrap up. Going back to that version of you years ago when you walked into Salt and Light and you had to come up with these goals for yourself over the next couple of years. Where do you see yourself now? Like what do you want to do with the rest of your life? What dreams do you have? What are you working towards?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want my son to go to a good college. That's a big one. I want to get an MBA, and I'm already, got some stuff working on that. What else was in my 10-year goals? Let me see. I want to write a book, and I'm going to do that. And
That's
I'm like 7 years in. I got 3 years to go.
I love it though. That's a lot. You're well on your way to achieving these, which is and that's phenomenal, right? Like, to actually, like, sit down and write these goals and yeah, and live them, right? And just see that it's possible. And the point about the book, I think that's real interesting too, right? Because it's inspirational for others to hear about your journey. And yeah, so I really enjoy having these kinds of conversations because to your point, like you don't know, but everyone's got their own story and people are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, but some backgrounds are objectively harder to overcome and succeed from than others. And it's really inspirational to yeah, to get a chance to talk to someone who's come such a long way. So Corinne, yeah, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mate. And yeah, I look forward to. I'm actually subscribing right now. I'm going to check out some of your past episodes. Can't wait.
Awesome. And yeah, and if we have people that are interested in reaching out either to hire some of these survivors or potentially to apply to your program, well, now they know where to find you.
Yeah, please. The Salt and Lake Coalition. If you have jobs in Chicago, we even have women from Northwest Indiana and, farther south, Kendall County and things like that. But if you have a job available, Amate, what should I do? What's the
Yeah, just
action
give
item?
us, yeah, like I said, tell where should they, how can they reach out to you? What's the best place to
Yeah.
get in contact?
Well, you can email me at, Corinne at saltandlightcoalition.com or give us a call at 312-685-2498 and I'll answer the phone.
Awesome. Do you guys, by the way, do you plan on expanding to other cities or can companies in other parts of the country hire these survivors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a few years ago, Tony and Isabel kind of sat and pondered, do we go wide or do we go deep, right? Do we go all over the country or do we just dig our roots in Chicago and kind of build upward? And so they decided to go deep. So what's happening though is that our reach is expanding. And so, like I mentioned, Northwest Indiana, they even had a woman from Loves Park who wanted to join our program so badly that she and a few other people got together and they commuted every day all the way here on, I don't remember if she took the train or drove, but so I think for now we're Chicago based, but at some point we're definitely going to expand because people around the country are hearing about our work and are interested in replicating.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Corinne, it's been great. And yeah, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's really inspirational.
Thanks, Mateo. I really appreciate you.